Thank you. Okay, so as we've discussed in the first part, you now have an idea of what domain-driven design is about, of what event sourcing is about, of what CQS is about, and how these concepts may fit each other. And now we're going to implement things. And as I said, we've created a framework for that called wolkenkit, which is open source. So if you would like to implement things using wolkenkit, the first thing you need to do is you need to install it, of course. And what you need to have on your machine is you need to have node.js installed, because wolkenkit is written in Node. And you need to have a running Docker instance on your machine, which in my case is Docker for Mac. Yeah, just Docker installation on your machine. So to install wolkenkit is simple. So you simply run npm install -g wolkenkit. And if you do this, yeah, of course, the usual stuff happens. So npm downloads wolkenkit, which is completely unnecessary on my machine as it was installed anyway. But yeah, for just to show that it actually works.
Is this a video or is it pre-recorded? No, it's not.
This is a materialized view. Okay. Okay, so we've installed it, and what you can now do is, example given, you can say, well, show me the version of the CLI that is installed. So the current version is 1.2.4. We are going to release the 2.0 release in the next 5 to 10 days. So I will show the demo on the old or on the now current stable version, but I will point out a few things that will change in version 2. And yeah, right. So, okay, what we now can do is we can create an initial template project structure using the wolkenkit init command. And as you can see, God bless you, as you can see, the init command has a template option. So if you don't provide that template option, a sample application gets installed for you, which is simple chat. And in my case now, I would like to show you how to create an application from scratch. So I'm going to specify a template, but I have to look up the URL of it. It's wolkenkit template empty. And so it's just that I have the folder structure already there. So let's copy that here and paste it. And yeah, as you now can see, we just fetch the template from GitHub. And we've initialized a new application. So if we now switch to the editor, you can see that there are a number of files and folders have been created. Well, it's a typical Node application, so let's have a look at the package.json file. And we can change a few things here already. So probably the thing that we are going to build is something such as wolkenkit never completed game. Maybe let's start small, so let's start with version 0. Then, yeah, well, the description is wolkenkit never completed game is whatever. You can do that on your own. And now you can see that there is a wolkenkit section inside of your package.json file, which has some settings which are important for wolkenkit. The first thing is that you need to provide an application name, which I'm going to use a short one, such as NCG. You can define which runtime you would like to run on. So the current wolkenkit runtime is 1.2.0. This will become 2.0 in the future as well, in the near future. So for now, let's stick with 1.2. And you can define one or multiple environments. An environment is something such as staging, testing, production, and so on. And you always have a default environment, and you define a few things, such as, example given, run node in development mode, not in production mode. Allow access from everywhere. This sets, configures cross-origin resource sharing. So for development mode, it's usually reasonable to allow access from anywhere. For a production system, you definitely don't want to do this. Yeah, the most interesting part is this. This is the address the application is going to start on. And maybe if I say, well, a local development setup, you would expect that it runs on localhost. As you can see, the host is not localhost. It's local.wolkenkit.io. And there's a special story behind this domain, because initially we said, okay, let's run everything on localhost. it's year 2018, and we think that it's not that professional anymore to provide things over HTTP. You should have an encrypted connection, so we wanted to make sure that you have to use HTTPS or maybe even HTTP2. But this means that you need a certificate. And I have almost never met anyone who said, yay, a certificate, let's create one. People are usually like, oh, a certificate, okay, yes. So our idea was run it on localhost and provide a localhost certificate, a valid one, for free as part of wolkenkit. So we went to our certificate vendor of trust, sent a certificate signing request for localhost to them, paid 100 euros, and then they told us that this is unfortunately not possible. What also was not possible was to return those 100 euros. So maybe their buying process could be updated slightly to first check whether the domain is valid and then get the money. Then, okay, however. And so we thought about how to solve this. And the best thing we came up with was let's create a domain that we have under our control, such as local wolkenkit.io, put it to public DNS, and make it point to 127.001. So it has exactly the same effect as localhost, but because we have the domain under our control, we can buy a certificate for it, and we deliver that certificate with wolkenkit. So when you start it, you just instead of localhost, use local wolkenkit.io, which has completely the same effect. It's still your machine. You just get a green certificate for free on your machine. So this is the story behind this domain. So that's basically the interesting part of the package JSON file. And then you can see that there is a server folder, and wolkenkit actually only cares about this server folder. You can add a client folder as well, a documentation folder, an images folder, or whatever you need. But the only thing wolkenkit cares about is this server folder. And if you open it, you can see that there are 3 subfolders. It's write model and read model, which should be a little bit familiar to you right now already. And flows. I didn't mention flows so far. Flows is about long-running transactions and processes that take a really long time to complete, maybe even days or things like that. But we won't look at them today. And yeah, in the read model and in the write model, there are still git keep files, because Git is not able to manage directories. It only manages files. So if you have an empty directory, it won't be committed to Git, so put a dummy file in there, and this is what this git keep file was for. So, okay, so we here have the write model. We now said, well, everything, okay, at the top level we had our domain, never completed game, and we said, well, why not map a domain to a domain? So maybe a domain in the DDD meaning of a domain is the same as a microservice. So why not use microservices to represent domains? So basically, we don't need to define the domain anywhere. The domain just is there because you are creating a wolkenkit application. So the next thing below that was the bounded context. So now let's create a bounded context for playing. And since a bounded context is just a boundary, a logical boundary around your language, we simply said, well, why not just take a folder for that one? We don't need to make things more complicated than necessary. So let's create a folder called playing. Inside of that folder, or inside of that bounded context, there's an aggregate, game.js. And this is, or the aggregate is called game, the file is called game.js. And well, an aggregate is just a JavaScript file where we now say, well, what does an aggregate have? I said an aggregate is about keeping state. So maybe our aggregate should have some initial state. Then, well, it has commands probably, such as open and make guess and things like that. And finally, it has events. And since it's node.js, you need to export all those things. So let's export the initial state, the commands, and the events. And this is the basic structure, what an aggregate looks like in wolkenkit. And now we can say, well, okay, let's create our first command. Let's create the open command. A command is in wolkenkit nothing but a function. So you have a function. Well, that's your first command. You're done. And this command gets a number, or this command handler to be correct, gets a number of parameters. Most of the time, a command needs to access the state of the aggregate. So somehow the command needs to access the aggregate, and initially we thought of this could be done by using the this keyword, but to be honest, so many people have problems with this. We decided that this is probably a bad idea and we wanted to make things more explicit. So we said, well, why not hand over the game itself as the first parameter? Then you get the actual command, which was sent by the client, which contains the data of the command, some metadata like when the command was sent, which user sent this command, and so on. And finally, a mark callback. And since everything or almost everything in Node.js is asynchronous, you need something to figure out, well, we are done. So we thought a callback would be a good idea here. This, by the way, is one thing that will change in version 2. This mark callback will be gone, and instead these methods may be async if you want to. So if you need to do asynchronous stuff, you can use async in a few days. And if it's synchronous, then just skip async and everything is fine. Right now, we have to write mark here. And the simple thing we can do is create a command that does nothing except say, well, everything is fine, I'm finished. So when we do this, we mark the command as done. Okay, now probably we would like to do a little bit more. So maybe when you open a game, we should maybe figure out which level to start with. So we can hard code this. So let's start with level 1. And we might say, well, we need to get the first question. So by the way, we need some kind of question database. As said, I don't want to make things more complicated than needed today, so let's create a folder which I called shared. It does not need to be named shared, you can name it however you would like to, and put a simple JSON file into this, like riddles.json, which contains an array of objects, and well, it contains questions. First letter of the alphabet, and the answer is of course A. And maybe a second question, something like 1 + 2 = whatever. So the answer should be 3, and so on. We can now add as many riddles as we want to. So if we want to access this riddles file, we need to require it. So let's say the riddles is require 1 level up, 2 levels up, shared riddles JSON, like this. And now we can say, well, our first question is in our riddles array at position level -1. Yeah, because of course the array is 0 based, levels are 1 based, so we need to subtract 1. And finally we get the question. So when somebody opens a game, I would like to make sure that after that the game was opened. So somehow we need to transform this command into an event. So, and since these events relate to the game instance, we publish those events on the game. So we say game.events, publish, and now we can publish an event. So we say, well, we would like to publish the opened event, and it also has some data like the level with which the game was opened and the question. So something like this. So this is basically the basic implementation of the open command. Maybe there's one thing more that we can do. We might say, well, sending an open command only makes sense if the game has not yet been opened. So if it does not exist yet. So we might say, well, if the game exists, the exists function is a special function on the game aggregate that exists out of the box. If the game already exists, but you send an open command, we might say, well, we mark this command as rejected because the game has already been opened. And of course, we need to return. This is again something that will change in the future because there is no mark callback anymore. You won't have to call anything such as mark as done. This will simply be gone. And instead of mark as rejected, you will say command reject, which is a little bit more directly related so that you reject the command. It's more explicit than mark as rejected. So this is another change that is going to happen, and that's it. That's our definition of the open command. Now in the events, we need to define an opened event, which is again just a function. And here we get again the game aggregate and the event in this time. There is no callback this time because the only task of an event is to update the state of our game aggregate, and this should always be a synchronous action. So here we say game set state. And what do we do? Maybe we have the level, which is initially undefined, and now we say, well, let's set the level to the level that is contained in the event's data. So this object that we hand over here as data to the opened event is available as event data here. We don't need to remember the question in our aggregate because using the level we can get back the question at any point in time. But what we might also want to have in the state is something such as is completed false, because initially of course it is not yet completed. So that's it. This is our definition of the aggregate, of the state, of the command, and of the event. And as you can see, we don't have any code that accesses the database, which responds to the message queue or something like that. It's very close to the actual domain. So, of course, we still have semicolons and we have curly braces and things like that. But if you're now talking to someone who has had the original idea for the game and who is not able to develop or write code, then I think you can still walk through this code at least better than most other code, because this is very close to the domain. Because you can say, well, is it true or is it implemented correctly? If the game exists, then we reject the request to open the game because the game has already been opened. And well, if everything's fine, then we start with level 1, get the question for level 1, and then say, well, the game is now opened. And that's it. Is this a correct implementation? And you don't have any SQL statements in between or any transactional stuff in between or things like that. What? I'm sorry? Oh, because, yeah, that's a pretty good question. Why do we need to include, or why do we include, we don't have to, but why do we include the question in the event if we don't use it here? Because the event is also sent to the clients, and for the client it may be of interest that, hey, a new game was started, it started in level 1, and the first question is, this is the only reason, because it may be of interest to the client. So now let's create a list of all running games. So let's add inside of the read model, as you can see, there's a lists folder. The fact that there's a lists folder is because we might also support other types of data structures like trees or graphs or anything like that. Right now we only support lists, but this way we are prepared for the future. So let's add a file here which is called games. So, and now let's create the basic structure for that again. So a list always has some fields, and a list has a number of event handlers. And again, we need to export them, so fields and when. And well, what does a list contain? Well, the current level, probably. And the current level has an initial state of undefined. The fact whether the game has already been completed is probably of interest. So this is, well, let's say this is false in the beginning. So yeah, I think we'll start. Oh, and of course here the question is of interest, because if you query what are the currently running games, it might be interesting to show in the UI what is the current task or the current question the user has to solve. So the question initial state is also undefined. So now we might say when in the context playing on the aggregate game an opened event is happening. So in other words, when a game is opened, then we react in some way to this. We unfortunately used this when at a few places, which made it a little bit hard to grasp when to use when. Okay, pun was not intended. So we changed this to projections in wolkenkit 2, but for now it's when. And now, okay, this is true. So, and now again we get the list here, we get the event here, and we have again a callback. The callback also will be gone in version 2. So now we say whenever a game has been opened for the list of games, this means that we need to add a new entry. So we here say games add, and well, the level we set to the level that is in the event. The question we set to the question that is given in the event. And well, is completed, we don't have to provide because its initial state is false anyway, so it will be attached automatically, and we can say, again, we are done with handling this event. Of course, this mark as done call will be gone in wolkenkit 2 as well. And that's it. We're finished, or we're completed. This is all you need to do to get the open command and the opened event up and running, and the list of games up and running. You don't have to write any code to access the database. You don't have to write any code for authentication. You don't have to write any code regarding to message queue handling and so on. You can just focus on the domain. And this is what your application should be about. So now let's start this and try things out. Okay, we're still missing a client. I don't know whether you have time for the next 3 months. Then we can build a client as well with beautiful CSS. Or maybe there's someone who is better at CSS than me. Okay, so let's start this. So to start this, we simply say wolkenkit start. And what wolkenkit start does is it now builds a number of Docker images from your code and starts those Docker images. And you can see that we also start a Postgres database, we start a MongoDB, because this is ready for the cloud and we want it to run distributed. And so, okay, now we've got the application up and running. What you can see here is that it's waiting for a ping endpoint to come up. If we just open this endpoint in the browser, you can see, okay, it responds with API version 1. Let's increase the font size a little bit. The ping endpoint is not that interesting. Where things get interesting is if we are looking at the configuration JSON endpoint, because here you now can see that we get a meta-level description of our domain. So we can get using an API call, we can get a description of our domain which says, well, we have a playing context which includes a game aggregate, which has some commands like open, transfer ownership, authorize. Transfer ownership and authorize are system-created commands. There are a number of events like opened, transferred ownership, authorized, open failed, open rejected, and so on. And finally, in the read model, we have a list which is called games. So, and now we would like to test our domain whether it does the right thing. Since I don't have 3 months now to build a client, I need some kind of debugging tool or something like that. And yeah, we could also use Postman, or we could also use curl, of course. But there is a tool for this, which is called console.wolkenkit.io. You can also, it's an NPM package as well, you can also install it locally. So let's use that, and I'm still connected to an application, so let's disconnect. So you can see here, we now can connect to an application. And of course, since our application is running on local wolkenkit.io 3000, we are going to connect to this. If we used authentication, then here we could add some authentication information to connect using an OpenID Connect provider, but we don't need this so far. So let's just connect. And what now happened at the moment when I clicked the connect button was that the console connected to the configuration JSON endpoint, got this information about what the domain is about, and now provides me with an app object where I have on the client side an object model that perfectly represents what we have on the server side. So I can here say, I'm using the command builder now, so we can here say, well, in the context playing, there's a game, and all these information now comes dynamically from the configuration endpoint. I would like to open a new game. Let's insert this. And you can see that there's an app object where you can run this code on. And this, by the way, there's under the hood, it uses the wolkenkit client SDK, which again is an NPM module, which you can install to your React application or to your Angular application or whatever. And this is exactly the same code you would write on the client side in your own application. So by using the console, you already learn how to use your domain from the client side. So let's just try to run it. And before I click execute, you can see here on the right, we've got here an events section. So if I click execute, we say, well, okay, open rejected. We get an open rejected event, and the reason is access denied. And the reason for this is that when we made up our minds on security on wolkenkit, we said it's way better to deny everything, because then people will complain and open up things, than to allow everything by default, because nobody will complain about a security hole where someone can do things that he or she shouldn't be able to do. So what we need to do is we need to change authorization here. And for that, there's a special property in the initial state, which is called isAuthorized. So we can configure authorization for commands and for events individually, because sometimes it makes sense, like only authenticated users should be able to open a new game, but we want everyone to be able to notice that a new game was opened. So you could have different authorization strategies for commands and events, even if they refer to each other. So now we need to say, well, the open command, since we don't have any authentication set up now, it should be available for the public, and the same is true for the opened event. Now, since I changed something on my backend code, I need to reload things here. And if I now reload things, some Docker containers need to be rebuilt. And as you can see, the console lost connection. And now we try to reconnect. And here we are again. So let's give it another try. Let's try to open the game again. So let's execute it, and now you see something else is going to happen. We get a transferred ownership event, which is always the first event on a new aggregate. And then it says, well, now this game was opened. And as you can see here, the data, it was opened using level 1 with the question first letter of the alphabet. And there's an aggregate ID, so we can now copy this aggregate ID and try to resend the open command for this specific game. Previously, I wanted to create a new game. This was why those parentheses were left empty. Now I'm going to address a specific game, so I'm going to put the ID into these parentheses and again try to run open. And because in our code we said, well, if the game already exists, mark this command as rejected. This should now not be possible. So let's try to execute it. And as you can see, we get an open rejected with the reason the game has already been opened. So let's switch to the read models and let's open the list of games. And here you can see, well, it's there. So yeah. Actually, for the read models, there are, at a later point in time, I'm going to show this when we are taking a look at and how the client is built. There are actually two methods to get access to the read model. One is you can read a list, which returns a snapshot. Or you can read and observe a list, which returns a snapshot and updates the snapshot whenever a read model gets updated on the server. So you get live updating views in your client for free without the hassle to set up WebSockets on your own or however you need to do that. So, okay, apparently our game works. Now the next part would be to implement the make guess command. I won't do that. I have prepared something for you. So let's, for the minute, let's stop this application and switch over to the already prepared version of the game. So this is at Projekte, the native web, wolkenkit, never completed game. And let's open this. And you will realize that there are many things that you will see again. As you can see, here's also a client folder, here's an images folder. And I've made some late changes which are not yet committed. So in the server folder, again, we have flows, read model, write model, and the shared folder. In the shared folder, again, we have our riddles JSON file. In the write model, we've got the playing context with the game aggregate. And you can see here, there's also the authorization for guess and succeeded and failed and so on. Everything available to the public. And if we take a look at the open command, it looks slightly different because I removed this if game exists call, because I would like to split verification and validation from the actual logic of which events to publish. And so we have a concept of middleware, similar to what Express does. So instead of providing a simple function to the open key, you can provide an array of functions, and there are some ready-made middlewares, such as only if not exists. So the open command should only run if the game does not yet exist. But if it exists, then run this code. And this is the very same code as I've written before. If we take a look at the guess command, it's a little bit longer. We say only run it if the game already exists. You can't make a guess on a game that has not yet been opened. This command should only be run if it gets validated by the following JSON scheme. So there must be a property called answer in there of type string. It may be empty, but it must be there. And yeah, then we have some logic again, where we check whether the game is already completed and calculating the next level and checking whether the answer is right or wrong, and so on. And then we publish a number of events, like if the answer is wrong, we publish a failed event. Otherwise, we calculate the next level and verify whether there is actually a next level. If there is no next level, we publish a succeeded event and then say, well, you've even completed the game. And if there is a next level, we then say, well, then we get the next question, and again publish a succeeded event, this time with the next level and the next question also on board, and mark the command as done. So that's pretty straightforward, I think. And yeah, here we've got a few more event handlers. As you can see, the failed event handler does not have any effect, at least not on the aggregate. It's just here for the sake of completeness. But the others, opened initializes the level, succeeded sets the level to the next level, and completed sets the isCompleted flag to true. And if we take a look at the read model, there are two lists actually. In the games list, this is similar to what we had before. When a game is opened, add a new entry to the list of games. When the game succeeds, then update a game and set the level and the question to the next level and the next question. When the game is completed, set its completed property to true, and that's it on this side. And in the statistics here we say, well, we would like to have something such as the high score. And when a game is opened, we first read the high score field from the underlying table. And if there is no such field, then let's add it. Otherwise, do nothing. And every time somebody succeeds, then take the value from the high score, and if the value is less than the level that was just successfully completed, then set the high score to the newly succeeded level. Okay, that's it. So let's start this once again. And while this starts in the background, we can have a look at the client. The client is a pretty simple React application which gets built using Webpack. And yeah, basically it starts in the source folder, and the index.js X file loads the wolkenkit client SDK. As I said before, this is just an NPM package. And this provides you with a wolkenkit object with a connect function, where you can say, now I would like my client application to connect to the wolkenkit application running on local wolkenkit.io port 3000. And what you get back is an object representing your API. And this object here is the very same thing that we had seen as app in the wolkenkit console. So now we can use this to access our backend. And I won't go into too much detail in the React code, because that is not that nicely. As said, I'm not a front-end developer primarily, so this can for sure be made more beautiful, but I would like to show a few things, such as, yeah, when we start the browser, we take our API in the context of playing, create a new game, and run the open command on it, and then await the appropriate opened event. So this does not wait for any opened event. It waits for the opened event that relates to this open command. So it's our opened event, and then we do something. The code, when we make a guess, looks similar. Then on our API, again, we access the context playing, a game with a specific ID, and we make a guess with an answer that we have provided, and then we await a failed or a succeeded event, whichever comes first, and then depending on what has happened, we update the UI accordingly. And if we are taking a look at where the high score example given gets read, then you can see here that using the API object again, we address the lists context in this time, which points to the read model. We take the statistics list and make a call to read and observe. So we would like to have a live update on the key high score, so on a single record from this table. And whenever it gets updated, we get here the new value, and then we update the state of our React front-end application. And if we now start this, we need to wait a few seconds because Webpack is going to build. At first, NPX has to download our runtime here, which is not related to VulcanKit. That's a completely different thing. And now we need to wait for Webpack to build this stuff. Okay, and then now let's open that website. And this is our version. And I'm definitely not a designer, even less than I'm a front-end developer. From that point of view, I was really, really happy to have a template to copy. And what I'm really, really, sorry for this, but what I'm really proud of is it even is responsive. This took me a week or so and some help of a friend. And yeah, so I thought, okay, let's make it similar. And as you can see, the high score initially is 0. So yeah, the first, as I said, these are now the questions that are collected and prepared for my daughter and her friends. I think it's 13 questions, so this is as far as I could get. And yeah, so the first question, 1 + 1 is of course 2. So if you remember when we answered correctly here, 5 × 7, what happened? We heard a nice sound. By the way, we didn't hear that sound anymore for an hour or so. We heard a sound and the input field turned green and it approached to the next level. And so I've tried my best to copy that, and actually the hardest part here was finding a sound file which you are allowed to use according to its license. And I really was surprised that like websites where you can buy stock photos, there are websites where you can buy stock sounds or whatever they are called. So I'm really proud that after half a day or so I found this MP3. Okay, so A, E, I, O, that's the vowels, so the next thing is U. As you can see, this works. Now, 4 × 9 is probably not 42, but if you remember, yeah, we'll be counting stars. Yeah, that's easy as well. We count stars, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So let's enter a 7 here to show again what happens when you are wrong. So it turns red and it wobbles. And so 42, I've made that as well. Actually, that was pretty easy in CSS. The hardest part in the overall CSS was this whole vertical centering thing, which is, to me, unbelievable that in year 2018, yeah, it's actually built with Flexbox, but I had to learn Flexbox for this. But yeah, it was very interesting to learn these things, and yeah, this is the finally up and running version of my own copy of nevercompletedgame.com. And as you can see, the high score has been updated. And if we now open the same website again in a new browser, you can see that the high score initially is 3. So let's play another, let's simulate another player. So this is 2. This is U. This is 36. So now this is the 3rd level. So after that, the high score would still be 3. And now it's Bube, Dame, König. Of course, it's the playing cards. So the next thing is not grass, by the way. Like in the movie, it's us. So, and when I now press enter, the high score should update. And because we said read and observe, both browser windows should update immediately in real time, which, as you can see, they do. So, yeah, And that's basically it. And by the way, one last thing. It's interesting what today you learn at elementary school, so that when you're at class number 4, your parents think that you are able to realize Fibonacci sequences. But yeah, as said, it's interesting what you learn at elementary school. Okay, so this is basically the implementation of never completed game using wolkenkit, which has been pretty easy, I think. And the next thing that we would like to do, which we are also about 2 to 4 weeks away from now, as you've seen, it's pretty easy to say wolkenkit start to run the application on your local machine. And yes, it's a number of Docker containers that get up and running, because in the end, we simulate a cloud environment on your machine. The next thing, besides releasing wolkenkit 2, that we are going to do is introducing a new command such as wolkenkit deploy. And if this command does not exist yet, if you then press enter, our goal is that your application is after 3 to 4 minutes up and running in the cloud. So we're introducing a hosted, a managed version of wolkenkit, because we think that people who want to focus on their domain and not put that much effort in the technical details of building things would probably also not like to put that much effort in operating things. So the managed version was obviously the next thing to do. And of course, we offer that for your own data center as well. So yeah, this will come in a few weeks, at least as a private beta. Regarding private beta, of course, there are some information you can get on wolkenkit. The first address is there's this brochure that I put on your seats. I've got more with me, so if you want to take one for your colleagues or friends or family or whatever, feel free to take more than one. And the first part or the first half of the brochure is in written form what I've told you in the first half of today. So you get all the theory behind it, which is completely separate from wolkenkit as a framework. And then the second part of the brochure shows you how to build a chat application from scratch using wolkenkit. What I didn't put on your seats, but which is here in the front available as well, is our quick start guide and cheat sheet. So the most important commands. So feel free to take that as well. And of course, the very most important thing, stickers. So feel free to grab them. And if you want to get some more information on this, then I think the best place to get started is the documentation of wolkenkit, which you can find at docs.wolkenkit.io. There, the currently stable version is pre-selected. You can also switch to the latest version to already get a peek preview of what will come with wolkenkit 2, which bugs have been fixed, and which new features are there, and so on. And let's switch to the latest version, as the navigation has slightly changed, and it will be updated then. So under media, this is, I think, again, an important part here. You can find the brochure and the cheat sheet as PDF for download. So if you need some more copies or things like that, you can get them here. And there is a list of articles. Currently, they are all in German, partially behind a paywall. But we also have a bunch of blog posts in English by different companies. We have a bunch of blog posts in German by different companies. And there's also a list of sample applications, among others, never completed game here. Boards, if you know Trello, then Boards is similar to Trello. It's like a blackboard where you can put digital post-its onto. We have a geocaching app. We have the chat that I already mentioned, which is the default template when you initialize a new application. And of course, there's the To-Do MVC app. It must be there. And apart from that, there's under Getting Started, you get the concepts explained again and how you update and so on. And there are also some guides available to get you up and running. If you need some help, the best place is there's a Slack channel. So it's linked in the documentation. So feel free to join our wolkenkit Slack. As well, of course, everything, as I said, it's open source. Everything is on GitHub. So you can find some more information here as well, and get a lot of links here where you can find the code, because it's distributed across a bunch of repositories and so on. So, and also where to get help and so on. And if anyone would like to submit something as a pull request, we are very open for that. And of course, if you have any feedback, if you find bugs, just please let us know, because this is the only way we can make things better. And one final word regarding the license: it's open source if you do open source as well. Actually, we would like to do everything as open source that we do, but unfortunately this doesn't pay our bills. So if you do closed source, then you have to buy a proprietary license. In other words, if you earn money, then we would like to get something from that. If you try to make the world a better place, we are going to support you in making the world a better place. I think this is a pretty fair offer if you want open source to be sustainable. Yeah, and finally, if you say, okay, I don't think that we need this here, because I assume that everyone is familiar with JavaScript and node.js, just for the sake of completeness, if you know someone where you think it may be interesting, but they need to learn Node first, I would like to point out techlounge.io, which is a video platform of us, where you can find entirely free video courses on Node, on React, and on VulcanKit. As you can see, the VulcanKit course has just been started. The Node one is the oldest one. So if you want to learn about that, feel free. And yeah.
So without explain the DOM as well, is it like a complete course for people that don't know how to program at all?
No, not yet. Yeah. So it's actually really only about Node and React as frameworks or libraries. Suddenly, somehow, some person comes to my mind, which would be maybe the perfect candidate for creating such a "We Explain the Web from Scratch" course. So, if you would like to.
I'm thinking about it, yeah.
Maybe we should talk after that with each other. And yeah, so this is where you can find more information about the underlying technologies. Of course, the front end does not only work with React. In VulcanKit, you can pretty much use anything you want. And finally, I didn't introduce myself in the beginning because Christoph did such a great job and told almost everything about me. I'm one of the founders and the CTO of The Native Web. We are a small company in the southwest of Germany, near Switzerland, near France. And we are focusing on consulting and development services around JavaScript, Node.js, everything web and cloud related, AWS, Git, Docker, whichever belongs there. We are primarily focusing on distributed architecture. This is why we are dealing with CQS, event sourcing, and domain-driven design. And yeah, so if you think that we might be the right people to assist you in any form, just let us know. If you have any questions or if you have any feedback, and most of the times the questions and the feedback happens when the speaker is gone. So feel free to send a mail to hello@thenativeweb.io, and we'll be more than happy to welcome you. Thanks for being here, thanks for attending, and I hope you liked the evening and you had fun. Thanks.